My name is Emily Parker. I'm 30 years old, and last week, before I even stepped into my dream home for the first time, I saw strangers inside, laughing, drinking, celebrating as if it were theirs. The worst part? They weren't strangers at all. They were my own family. And before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment where you are watching from. I stood in my tiny apartment living room, my phone clutched tight in my hand, my breath hitched. On the screen, my new living room. My living room. Balloons floated near the high ceilings. Laughter echoed, though I could only hear it faintly through the app. My sister-in-law, Sarah, twirled with a wine glass, her laugh loud and carefree. My niece and nephew, usually so polite, were running across the polished wood floors in their outdoor shoes. And there, in the center, my brother Jason, holding up a champagne flute. He was toasting. To what? To them? In my house? My vision blurred. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I'd kept it a secret. Every single person in my life. A deep, cold dread settled in my stomach. They were celebrating. In my dream house? The one I hadn't even set foot in as an owner yet. The one I had bled for. I zoomed in on the screen. Jason's face was bright, full of an easy confidence I'd always envied. He was saying something, a grand gesture with his free hand. Sarah was nodding, smiling up at him, like he was the most brilliant man alive. And the kids, they were bouncing on my new couch, the one I picked out specifically because it was tough and durable and wouldn't show every little spill. But they weren't being careful. They were just being themselves. In my house, my first moment, stolen, right there, on a tiny screen. I could feel the anger starting to bubble, hot and sharp, beneath the icy shock. But mostly it was just a profound, gut-wrenching sadness, a feeling I knew all too well. This wasn't just about a house. It was about everything. Everything they'd always taken. Everything they'd always assumed. And now they were doing it again, right under my nose. Or, more accurately, right on my security camera feed. My family, the ones who were supposed to protect you, they were the ones doing the hurting. Again. 2. Backstory. The dream home. To understand what that house meant, you have to understand what my life was. It wasn't a life of grand tragedies or dramatic hardships. It was a life of 1,000 tiny cuts, of being systematically overlooked, of a quiet, relentless erosion of self. I was the responsible one, the dependable one. In my family, those were not compliments. They were job descriptions for the person who was expected to ask for nothing and give everything. My career as a nurse was a perfect example. To my parents, it was a nice, stable job for a girl like you. They never saw the reality of it. They never saw me during a 16-hour double shift, running on stale coffee and sheer adrenaline, my feet aching so badly it felt like I was walking on broken glass. I remember one particularly brutal night in the ICU. We were short-staffed, and I was juggling 3 critical patients. One of them, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, was fading fast. His family couldn't make it in time. For the last hour of his life, I sat with him, holding his frail, paper-thin hand, talking to him softly so he wouldn't die alone. I went home that morning as the sun was coming up, so emotionally and physically drained that I just sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. That shift earned me overtime pay. I remember looking at the extra $280 on my pay stub and thinking, that's a new kitchen faucet. That shift paid for the faucet in my dream house. Every sacrifice had a tangible goal. Every ounce of my pain and exhaustion was being converted into something real, something permanent, something mine. Meanwhile, my brother Jason lived in a completely different reality. He was the golden child, the one all the hopes and dreams were pinned on. He was charming and handsome, with a quick laugh and a story for every occasion. He drifted through life on a cloud of my parents' unwavering belief in his potential. He'd had a dozen jobs since college, none lasting more than a year. There was the startup he launched with $20,000 of our parents' retirement savings, a vague tech idea that dissolved within 6 months. It wasn't a failure, of course. According to my father, it was a valuable learning experience about the realities of venture capitalism. There was the real estate course he took, which led to nothing but a new convertible he convinced my dad to co-sign for, because he needed to project success. He was fired from a sales job for not meeting his quota, but the story we were told at Sunday dinner was that he'd quit because of his unethical boss. Every failure was reframed as a stepping stone. Every misstep was someone else's fault. And through it all, he and his wife Sarah lived a life that was far beyond their means, but perfectly in line with their sense of entitlement. They took ski trips to Colorado and beach vacations to Mexico, funded by loans from my parents that were never meant to be repaid. Sarah wore designer handbags and got weekly manicures, while I was carefully darning a hole in my favorite pair of scrubs to make them last another 6 months. The unfairness of it was a constant, low-grade fever in my life. The dynamic was set in childhood. I remember being in 4th grade and winning the school science fair. I had worked for weeks on a project about crystal formation. I was so proud. I brought home the blue ribbon and the certificate. My mother glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," before turning her attention back to Jason, who was loudly complaining about his C in history. My father spent an hour that night with Jason, patiently explaining the Peloponnesian War, while my blue ribbon sat on the kitchen counter, ignored. I learned a powerful lesson that day. My achievements were quiet and therefore insignificant. Jason's struggles were loud and therefore important, so I went quiet. I stopped talking about my goals because I knew they would either be dismissed or, worse, somehow co-opted for Jason's benefit. When I started saving for a car in high school, my parents borrowed the $1,500 I had saved to pay for Jason to attend a summer leadership camp. I never saw the money again. I took the bus for another year. The dream of the lake house started then, as a form of silent rebellion. It was a secret I kept locked away in my heart. I first saw it when I was 16. I was on a bike ride with a friend, and we had cycled out to the old part of town by the lake, and there it was. A 2-story house, painted a soft gray with dark blue shutters, a wide, welcoming porch, and a huge oak tree in the front yard. It wasn't a mansion, but it looked solid, peaceful. It looked like a place where a person could finally be quiet and feel safe. The for sale sign in the yard seemed like a personal invitation. I knew it was an impossible dream, but I took a mental picture of it. That mental picture became my North Star. For years, I followed the house. I'd check the county's property records online to see if it had sold. I'd occasionally drive by, just to look at it. It became a symbol of everything I wanted: independence, stability, and a life that was beholden to no one. When it came up for sale again a few months ago, my heart hammered in my chest. Price reduced. It was still a terrifying number, but after more than a decade of fanatical saving, of living like a pauper while my peers were traveling and buying new cars, I was close. I had more than they thought. I had more than anyone knew. I made the appointment with the real estate agent under a cloak of secrecy. Walking through the front door for the first time was a surreal experience. It was even better than I had imagined. The afternoon sun streamed through the large living room window, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool surface of the granite countertops in the kitchen. I walked out onto the back porch and breathed in the scent of lake water and pine trees. This was it. This was the place. The entire process of buying it was a tightrope walk of anxiety and deception. I took covert calls from my mortgage broker in the hospital supply closet. I used my lunch breaks to run to the bank for paperwork. I told my parents I was working extra shifts to pay off some student loans, a lie that was both plausible and palatable to them. The truth was too precious, too fragile. I knew instinctively that if I told them, the dream would be contaminated. Jason would suddenly need a place to stay for a few months. My mother would insist on choosing the paint colors. My father would offer his help with renovations, which meant he would criticize every choice I made. They would swarm it, consume it, and make it theirs. The day I closed on the house was one of the happiest of my life. I sat in my car in the title company's parking lot, holding the signed papers and the single shiny key. I didn't cheer or cry. I just felt a profound sense of quiet, powerful relief. I had done it. All alone. I had built my own lifeboat. And now, watching my family on my phone screen, I realized they weren't just trying to climb aboard. They were trying to sink it. The hour before Mrs. Alden's call had been one of the calmest, most hopeful hours of my entire adult life. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across my living room floor, and painting the stacks of cardboard boxes in warm, golden hues. The frantic energy of packing had finally subsided, leaving behind a satisfying ache in my muscles and a sense of completion. I had just finished the last box of books, taping it shut and labeling it with a thick black marker. That was it. Everything I owned in the world was now contained in these brown cardboard squares. Ready for a new beginning? I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the floor, leaning my back against the lumpy arm of my old sofa. I looked around the small apartment that had been my home for 8 years. It had served its purpose. It had been a safe, if cramped, haven B-roll to the A-roll of my real life, which took place at the hospital and in my dreams of the future. I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming pull of what was to come. I let my mind drift, picturing the house. I thought about where my ridiculously large collection of novels would go, on the built-in bookshelves next to the fireplace, of course. I imagined my lumpy old sofa in front of the picture window, a perfect spot for reading and watching the seasons change on the lake. I was thinking about the simple, profound pleasure of my first morning there, waking up not to the sound of city traffic, but to the gentle lapping of water against the shore, making coffee in a kitchen where I had enough counter space to actually set things down, drinking that coffee on my very own porch. These were small, simple dreams, but they were the fuel that had kept me going through countless exhausting shifts and lonely nights. The anticipation was a physical thing, a warmth spreading through my chest. For the first time, I felt like I was on the precipice of a life I had truly chosen. The ringing of my phone was an unwelcome intrusion into this peaceful daydream. I saw the unknown number and the local area code and felt a small jolt of excitement. Maybe it was the local welcome wagon? A new neighbor wanting to introduce themselves? I answered with a genuine warmth in my voice, ready to embrace my new community. The moment Mrs. Alden introduced herself, that warmth grew. I remembered her vividly from the walkthrough. She had a kind, crinkled smile and hands that were perpetually covered in a fine layer of dirt from her beloved garden. She represented the kind of neighborly peace I was so desperately seeking. But as she spoke, the warmth in my chest turned to ice. Her words came in hesitant, worried bursts. Lights on, music playing, cars in the driveway. Each phrase was a small, sharp blow, chipping away at the peaceful fantasy I had constructed. I tried to deflect, to find a logical anchor in a sea of rising panic. The agent? The old owners? But her gentle, persistent descriptions dismantled each of my rationalizations. "No, dear, it's definitely not the agent," she said, her voice full of a grandmotherly certainty. "The man on the porch, he's a big, boisterous fellow. Very pleased with himself." I heard him on the phone laughing. He said, "Yeah, the view is killer. I can't wait to get the boat out on the water. He's acting like he owns the place." My throat tightened. A boisterous man, pleased with himself, acting like he owned the place. It was a perfect description of my brother Jason, but it couldn't be. He didn't have the address. He didn't have a key. And the woman, Mrs. Alden continued, oblivious to my internal crisis. "She's very glamorous." She was directing two younger men who were carrying in what looked like cases of wine. She told them, "Put it in the pantry for now. I'll organize it all tomorrow." She said it with such authority, dear, like a queen in her castle. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. The casual command, the cases of wine, the assumption of control. A wave of dizziness washed over me. How? The question hammered at my brain. How? 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 And the balloons, Mrs. Alden added, her voice dropping as if sharing a crucial piece of a puzzle. "I saw them when the woman opened the front door. A whole bunch of them tied to a chair in the dining room. It's a party, Emily. There's no doubt about it. I can't imagine why they wouldn't have waited for you. It seems so rude." Rude. The word was so quaint, so inadequate for the monumental violation she was describing. It wasn't rude. It was a home invasion, perpetrated by my own blood. I tried to keep my voice even, but it came out as a strangled squeak. "Mrs. Alden, I don't know what to say. No one was supposed to be there." "No one? Oh, you poor dear," she clucked sympathetically. "I was afraid of that. I knew something wasn't right. The whole thing feels off, like a play where the main actor hasn't shown up yet. You just call me back if you need anything, all right? If you need me to go over there and give them a piece of my mind, you just say the word. I may be 82, but I can still wield a garden trowel with some menace." I managed a weak, watery laugh. "Thank you, Mrs. Alden. Really, you were right to call. I have to figure this out." After I hung up, the phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I didn't move to pick it up. I just sat there on my box labeled fragile, surrounded by the neatly packed pieces of my old life, while the vision of my new life was being desecrated just a few miles away. The silence in the apartment was deafening. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a countdown to a disaster that had already happened. My mind, usually so clear and methodical, was a chaotic storm of questions and accusations. How did they get the address? How did they get a key? Did my parents know? The last question landed with a sickening thud in the pit of my stomach. Of course they knew. This elaborate, audacious takeover was not something Jason could have orchestrated on his own. It had the hallmarks of my parents enabling all over it. The quiet manipulation, the feigned ignorance, the complete disregard for my feelings. I stood up and began to pace the narrow corridor between the boxes, my hands clenched into tight fists. A hot, furious energy was starting to burn through the initial shock. I thought about the key on my counter. My key. My singular hard-won key. And I imagined another key, a copy, being slid into Jason's hand by my mother with a gentle pat and a whispered, "Go on, son. You deserve it." The image was so vivid, so plausible that it made me physically sick. I leaned against a stack of boxes, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't just about a house. This was a coup. A family coup where I was being overthrown before I had even been crowned. My eyes fell on my phone, lying face down on the floor. The security app. I had almost forgotten about it. The thought of opening it filled me with a profound sense of dread. It felt like opening Pandora's box. Once I looked, there would be no going back. There would be no more room for doubt, no more possibility of a simple misunderstanding. I would see the truth, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the truth would be devastating. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone. Maybe I could just drive over there, confront them in person, but I knew what would happen. They would gaslight me. They would call me dramatic. They would turn the tables and make me the villain for ruining their happy evening. No, I needed evidence. I needed to see it for myself, unfiltered by their lies and manipulations. I needed to witness the crime before I confronted the criminals. Slowly, deliberately, I bent down and picked up the phone. My hand was steady now, the trembling replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I swiped the screen open, my thumb moving with grim purpose towards the small icon of a camera. It was time to face the truth. The security app icon seemed to mock me from my phone screen, a stylized, impersonal camera lens that was about to become a window into the deepest betrayal of my life. My thumb hovered over it for a second that stretched into an eternity. Part of me, the part that had survived 30 years of my family's casual cruelty, screamed at me to stop. Don't look. Don't know for sure. If you don't see it, maybe you can pretend it's not as bad as you think. But the nurse in me, the part that always needed to diagnose the problem before treating it, took over. I needed to see the wound before I could figure out how to stitch it shut. I pressed the icon. A loading screen appeared. A simple spinning wheel that felt like a roulette wheel deciding my fate. The app was connecting to the Wi-Fi I'd had installed last week. I remembered the technician, a cheerful young man, saying, "You'll have a great signal here. Perfect for streaming movies or keeping an eye on the place." I had smiled, thinking only of the movies. Now the phrase "keeping an eye on the place" had a sinister, sickening weight. The connection established. The screen flickered from black to a pixelated mosaic of color, which then sharpened into a crystal-clear, panoramic view of my living room. And my breath caught in my throat. It was all true. Everything Mrs. Alden had said was an understatement. It wasn't just a party. It was an occupation. They were not guests. They were conquerors. They moved about the space with an effortless, unthinking ownership that was breathtakingly arrogant. My gaze was drawn first to the details of the house itself, the things I had chosen with such care. The walls, painted in a shade called morning fog, were supposed to be a calming, serene backdrop. Now they were the backdrop for my brother's boorish celebration. The stone fireplace, which I had envisioned with a simple, elegant mirror above it, was currently being used as a shelf for empty beer bottles. And the floors, the beautiful wide plank oak floors that I had stretched my budget to the absolute limit for, were being treated like the floor of a public bar. Someone had spilled something sticky near the entrance to the kitchen, a dark puddle that no one was making any move to clean up. My nephew Ben was driving a toy truck across them, the plastic wheels making a grating sound that I could almost feel in my teeth. I panned the camera's view. My eyes landed on my sister-in-law, Sarah. She was holding court by the kitchen island, a glass of red wine in her hand. She was telling a story, gesturing grandly, her bracelets jangling. I zoomed in, the audio becoming clearer, and Jason just said, "You know what? We need this. The kids need a yard. I need an office that isn't a corner of the bedroom." He just made it happen. He's always been like that. When he decides he wants something, he gets it. The lie was so bald-faced, so audacious that it took my breath away. He made it happen, as if the down payment had magically appeared from his sheer force of will, as if the mortgage was being paid by his potential. The other women around her, friends of hers I vaguely recognized, were nodding in admiration, their eyes wide. "He's amazing," one of them gushed. "You guys are so lucky." Lucky. The word was a punch to the gut. I thought of the endless nights I had spent studying for my nursing exams, the years of back-breaking work, the relentless, soul-crushing frugality. I thought of the time I had to have a cavity filled without anesthetic because the extra cost for the injection wasn't in my budget that month. That was what made this happen. Not Jason's charm, not his ambition, my pain, my sacrifice. Then the camera caught Jason himself. He had his arm slung around my father's shoulders. My father, who was supposed to be 2 states away on a fishing trip. Another lie. My dad was beaming, his face flushed with pride and champagne. "I always knew you had it in you, son," he said, clapping Jason on the back. "This is what a man does. He provides a home for his family. A real home." My mother was there too, standing beside them, her face a mask of maternal adoration. She adjusted Jason's collar, her hands fluttering with pride. "Your grandfather would be so proud to see the family name on a house like this," she said. The family name? The irony was a bitter pill. The family name on the deed, on the mortgage, on every single legal document was Parker. Emily Parker. Mine. But that was a detail they had conveniently erased. In their narrative, I didn't exist. I was not the provider. I was not the one carrying on any kind of legacy. I was a ghost in my own triumph. My eyes scanned the rest of the room. My Aunt Carol was there, running her hand over the back of the sofa. "Is this new?" she asked Sarah. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah replied with a smug smile. "We had it custom made. The fabric is imported. My sofa. The one I had ordered from a mid-range furniture store after months of research and saving. The one I had a 5-year payment plan for. Custom made, imported. The ease with which they stole not just my property but the very facts of its existence was dizzying. They were building a whole new reality in my living room, a fiction where they were the heroes, the deserving inheritors of a beautiful life. The rage that had been simmering inside me began to boil. It was a clean, pure fury. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy. They had all been in on it. My parents, my brother, my sister-in-law. They had planned this. They had waited for me to do all the hard work, the saving, the applications, the inspections, the closing, and then they had simply swooped in at the last moment to claim the prize. My finger moved on the screen, swiping to the camera that covered the dining room. There, on the table I had bought with my first ever bonus check from the hospital, sat a large, professionally decorated cake. In swirling blue icing, it read, "Congratulations, Jason and Sarah, on your new home." That was it, the final undeniable proof. The concrete evidence of their premeditated theft. They had ordered a cake. They had invited guests. They had turned the most significant achievement of my life into a party celebrating their own breathtaking entitlement. I felt a strange, chilling calm descend over me. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching chasm in my chest. But the anger had sharpened into a point. It was no longer a chaotic emotion. It was a tool. They had underestimated me. They had always underestimated me. They saw plain Emily, the quiet, dependable girl who would eventually just sigh and accept the injustice, because that's what she had always done. They thought they could just take my house and I would just let them. They were wrong. I stood up, my back straight. I looked at the smiling, laughing faces on my phone screen one last time. They were so happy, so confident, so utterly secure in their belief that they had won. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that simple Emily, the ghost they had erased from their story, was about to become the one thing they had never, ever prepared for. The rightful owner of the property, armed with the truth. My first move was clear. I had to call my parents. I had to hear the lies from their own mouths. I needed to hear their justification, their betrayal, spoken in their own voices. It was the last piece of evidence I needed before I burned their world to the ground. Before I made the call, I took a moment to prepare myself. I walked into my small, cramped bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. I looked like a victim. I felt like a victim, but I couldn't afford to sound like one. Not with them. Any display of emotional vulnerability would be twisted and used against me. Tears would be dismissed as drama. A raised voice would be labeled hysteria. I had to be calm. I had to be factual. I had to be a stone wall they could not dismantle with their usual tactics of guilt and manipulation. I took a deep, steadying breath, picturing the scene on my phone. Jason beaming with unearned pride. My father clapping him on the back. My mother preening over her golden boy. They were a united front, a fortress of delusion and entitlement. To breach those walls, I couldn't use emotion. I had to use facts. The deed, the mortgage, the security camera footage, the truth. I walked back into the living room, picked a clear spot on the floor, and sat down, cross-legged. I placed the phone in front of me, the live feed still playing, the sound turned down low. It was a silent movie of my own humiliation. I needed it in front of me, a constant, infuriating reminder of what was at stake. I couldn't let them talk me out of this. I couldn't let them make me doubt my own reality, something they were experts at doing. With a steady hand, I dialed my mother's number. I knew she would be the first line of defense, the one tasked with smoothing things over, with managing my feelings and coercing me into acceptance. She answered on the second ring, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "Emily, honey, I was just thinking about you. Are you all packed and ready for the big day tomorrow?" The casual, blatant lie was like a splash of cold water. She was there. I had seen her on the camera. She was standing not 20 feet away from Jason. Yet she answered the phone as if she were at home, knitting a sweater. "Mom," I began, my voice level, colder than I had intended. "I know where you are." There was a fractional pause on the other end, a barely perceptible intake of breath. The cheerful facade cracked just enough for me to see the calculation happening behind it. "Whatever do you mean, honey? I'm at home watching television. Your father's out in the garage." "No, you're not," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen where her animated, lying face was visible in the crowd. "You're at my house. On the lake. You're standing in the living room, and you're holding a glass of champagne. Dad is there too. He's talking to Jason by the fireplace." The silence on the other end was longer this time, heavier. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of her mind, searching for a new strategy, a new lie to cover the old one. When she spoke again, her voice had shed its fake cheerfulness, replaced by a tone of weary exasperation, the tone she always used when I was being difficult. "Oh, Emily, for heaven's sake, don't be so dramatic. We were going to tell you. Jason was just so excited he couldn't wait. He wanted to get the kids settled in before his big sales conference next week. You know how important this is for his career." The excuses were so predictable, so insulting in their transparency. "Settle them in? Mom, he's throwing a housewarming party. There's a cake on my dining room table that says, 'Congratulations, Jason and Sarah.' He's not settling in. He's moved in. Into my house? Well, he needs the space, honey," she said, her voice hardening. "It's a practical matter. His apartment is bursting at the seams, and you know how Sarah likes to entertain. This house, it's perfect for them. It's a real family home. And what am I?" I shot back, the question sharp and pointed. "Am I not family? Does my hard work not matter?" "Of course it matters, dear," she said in a placating tone that set my teeth on edge. "And we are so proud of you for arranging this for your brother. It was such a selfless, generous thing to do." I almost choked. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me speechless for a moment. They weren't just taking my house. They were trying to reframe the theft as a gift from me. A noble sacrifice I had made for the good of the family. They were trying to make me a willing participant in my own erasure. "I didn't arrange anything, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I bought the house for me, with my money, from my job. Jason had nothing to do with it. He is trespassing." "Trespassing! That's a horrible word, Emily," she gasped, her voice dripping with manufactured shock. "He is your brother. This is a family matter, not some legal squabble. We were thinking it would be a wonderful investment for you. You let Jason and his family live there, maintain the property, and you'll have a lovely asset for your future." Suddenly, my father's gruff voice cut in. He must have taken the phone from her. "Emily, that's enough. Your mother is right. Stop making a scene. You bought a house that's too big for you. Your brother needs a house. It's a simple solution. He'll cover the utilities, and you can handle the mortgage. It's a smart financial arrangement." His words, so cold and pragmatic, were somehow more painful than my mother's emotional manipulations. He had reduced my dream to a line item on a budget, a smart financial arrangement that benefited everyone but me. He saw no emotional component, no sense of achievement, no pride. He just saw an asset to be allocated to the person he deemed more deserving. "It's not a financial arrangement, Dad," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. "It's my home. Do you understand that? Mine, the place I was going to live, the future I built for myself." "Don't get hysterical," he grumbled. "You're single. You work all the time. What do you need with 4 bedrooms and a yard? Be realistic. This is for the best. Jason has a family to think about. He's the man of the family. He needs this kind of support. You should be happy to help him, the man of the family." The phrase hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud of everything that was wrong with our family. Jason, the irresponsible, debt-ridden man-child, was the man of the family, and I, the self-sufficient, responsible woman who had just single-handedly purchased a $500,000 property, was expected to be his support system. The combined force of their delusion was staggering. They had created a narrative so complete, so hermetically sealed against the truth, that there was no way for me to penetrate it. In their story, they were the wise, benevolent parents, making a sensible decision for the good of their children. Jason was the deserving, ambitious son, finally getting the home he was owed, and I was the selfish, dramatic, hysterical daughter making a fuss over just a house. I realized then that I was not going to get an apology. I was not going to get understanding. I was not even going to get a sliver of acknowledgement of the truth. They were never going to see me, because they were too blinded by the blazing glory of their golden boy. A profound, sorrowful clarity washed over me. The Emily who craved their approval, the Emily who just wanted them to be proud of her, died in that moment. She was a casualty of their relentless favoritism. In her place was someone new, someone colder, harder, and utterly finished with their games. You wouldn't really call the police on your own brother, would you? My mother's voice had come back on the line, a last desperate attempt at guilt. Think of the humiliation. Think of the children. I looked at the silent party still unfolding on my phone screen. I saw them, so comfortable in my home, so secure in their theft. They weren't thinking of me. They weren't worried about my humiliation. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. Watch me, Mom, I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision, the calm of a decision finally, irrevocably made. Watch me. I ended the call, cutting off her sputtering protest. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I simply placed it back on the floor beside me. My fingers, no longer trembling, moved across the keypad, dialing 3 simple numbers, 911. The time for talking was over. The 911 operator's voice was a lifeline of calm in my swirling storm of fury and betrayal. 911, what is your emergency? I took a breath, forcing the tremor out of my voice. Yes, I need to report intruders in my home. My own words sounded foreign, like something from a movie. This wasn't something that happened in real life. Not like this. Okay, ma'am. What is the address? I gave her the address of the lake house, my voice clear and steady. The operator's fingers clacked on a keyboard in the background, a methodical sound that was somehow reassuring. And you are not at the residence now? No, I confirmed. I'm at my apartment. I'm watching them on my home security cameras. There was a brief pause. You can see them in the house right now? Yes, it's a party. There are at least a dozen people inside. They broke in. I chose the words carefully. What they had done was a form of breaking in. Even if they had a key they had no right to possess. Do you know these individuals, ma'am? This was the question I had been dreading. The one that separated this from a simple burglary and turned it into something messy, something ugly. Yes, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. It's my family. Another pause, this one longer. I could sense the operator shifting gears, moving from a standard breaking and entering call to something more complicated. Okay, ma'am. And they do not have your permission to be there? No, I stated firmly, the anger rising again, clean and sharp, burning away the doubt. They do not. I am the sole owner of the property. I have the deed. I closed on it last week. My move-in date is tomorrow. They are trespassing. I want them removed from my property. I understand, ma'am. We will dispatch officers to the location. Can you give me your name and a contact number? I gave her the information. As she confirmed the details, I watched the silent movie still playing on my phone. Jason was now attempting to open a bottle of champagne with a dramatic flourish, making everyone laugh. They were so comfortable, so oblivious. They had no idea that the world they had built inside my house was about to come crashing down. Officers are on their way. Ms. Parker, it's recommended that you meet them at the residence to verify ownership and make a statement. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, and ended the call. The 20 minutes between hanging up with 911 and arriving at the house were the longest of my life. The first thing I did was gather my proof. I moved with a strange, detached efficiency, as if I were a nurse prepping a patient for surgery. I went to the filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents and pulled out the thick folder from the closing. Inside was the original deed, signed and notarized, with my name, Emily Parker, clearly printed as the grantee. I added the final mortgage approval statement and the receipt for the security system installation. I slipped my driver's license into the front pocket of the folder. This was my armor. As I drove, my hands were clamped onto the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A war was raging inside me. Every conditioned response from a lifetime of being plain Emily screamed at me to turn back. Don't make a scene. Don't cause drama. It's just a house. You're tearing the family apart. My mother's voice, my father's voice, they were a venomous chorus in my head. They had trained me so well to put my own needs last, to absorb every injustice with a quiet sigh, that this act of self-preservation felt like an act of profound aggression. But then I would glance at the phone mounted on my dashboard, the camera feed still live. I saw Sarah kicking off her expensive shoes and putting her bare feet up on my new coffee table. I saw my Uncle Mark helping himself to another beer from a cooler they had brought into my kitchen, and I saw Jason, my charming, useless brother, accepting congratulations for a victory he had not earned. The sight was a constant injection of resolve. They had done this. They had pushed me to this point. This wasn't me tearing the family apart. This was me refusing to let them tear me apart any longer. I pulled up to the end of the street just as the first police car arrived, its lights off, coasting to a quiet stop a few houses down. A second car followed a moment later. They were being discreet, assessing the situation. Then, as if on a silent cue, they both turned on their flashing lights. The street was instantly bathed in strobing waves of red and blue light, the colors painting the sides of the houses and reflecting off the dark, placid surface of the lake. Through my phone, I saw the effect inside the house. The music cut off abruptly. Confused faces turned toward the windows. Jason's confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance. "What the hell is that?" I heard him mutter. I watched as he strode to the front door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch with an air of aggrieved authority, as if the police had arrived to interrupt his royal coronation. I saw two officers get out of their cars and walk calmly up the driveway. This was my cue. I put my car in drive and pulled up across the street. I got out, clutching my folder of documents to my chest. Every window on the street had a face in it now. Mrs. Alden was standing on her porch, her hand over her mouth. My family's party was now a public spectacle. The humiliation I knew they would feel gave me a grim, unhappy satisfaction. "Officers, what seems to be the problem?" Jason asked, his voice smooth as silk, trying to take control of the situation. "We're just having a small family get-together, sir." "We received a call about intruders at this address," the first officer said, his eyes scanning the partygoers who were now crowding in the doorway behind Jason. Jason let out a hearty, disarming laugh. "Intruders? Oh, no, you've got it all wrong. This is my house, a family property. I think my sister might have made a prank call. She's a bit emotional," he said, tapping his temple with a knowing look, a bit of a flair for the dramatic. That's when I stepped forward, walking out of the shadows and into the flashing lights. "I'm Emily Parker," I said, my voice cutting through the air, clear and steady. "I'm the one who called." Jason's face went slack with shock. My parents, who were now standing behind him, looked horrified. My mother's face was a mask of pale, trembling disbelief. My father's was dark with thunderous rage. "Emily!" my mother hissed. "What have you done?" I ignored them. I walked directly to the lead officer, extending the folder. "Officer, my name is Emily Parker. This is the deed to this property, which is in my name only. This is my driver's license, which matches the name on the deed. These people are trespassing in my home, and I want them removed." The officer took the folder. His expression was neutral, professional. He scanned the deed, then looked at my ID. He shined his flashlight on the document, then back at my face. He nodded slowly. His partner was watching Jason, his hand resting casually on his belt. The dynamic had shifted instantly. Jason was no longer the charming homeowner. He was a potential suspect. "Sir," the officer said, his voice now devoid of any pleasantry, addressing Jason. "This document states that Emily Parker is the sole owner of this property. We're going to have to ask you and your guests to vacate the premises immediately," Jason sputtered, his charm evaporating into panicked rage. "Vacate? This is my house." "She's lying." "Dad, tell them." My father stepped forward, his face purple. "This is a family dispute, officer. You have no right to be here." "Sir, right now this is a trespassing complaint," the second officer said, his voice firm. "And we have a legal document of ownership right here. You all need to leave now." The reality of the situation finally began to sink in. The party was over. Sarah, who had been watching from the doorway, let out a venomous hiss. "You will not get away with this, Emily. You psycho." My mother burst into tears, the loud, theatrical sobs she always used to get her way. "Emily, how could you do this to your own brother? To your family? In front of all these people?" The guests, Jason's friends, and our extended family began to back away, melting into the shadows, not wanting to be part of the official police action. The humiliation was complete. One by one, my family was escorted out of my house. They were told to collect their essential belongings and leave the rest. The cooler, the leftover cake, the cases of wine, they were all left behind. I watched as my niece and nephew were led out, both of them crying in confusion, their tears sending a sharp, painful pang of guilt through me. I pushed it down. This was not my fault. Jason was the last to leave. As he walked past me, his face was a twisted mask of hatred. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eye and said nothing. My silence was more powerful than any retort. The police watched until every car had pulled away, their taillights disappearing down the dark, quiet street. One of the officers handed me back my folder. "Do you want to press charges, Ms. Parker?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "Not tonight. I just want my house back." He nodded. "You have a good night then." And changed the locks. They got back in their cars and drove away, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence. I was standing in the driveway of my dream house, under the cold, distant stars. The red and blue lights were gone. My family was gone. I was finally truly alone. I turned and faced the open front door of my house. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. But as I stood there, all I felt was the hollow, aching emptiness of a battle that I had won. But at a cost I was only just beginning to understand. The police officers had advised me to wait until morning to properly assess the house, but I couldn't. I needed to go inside. I needed to reclaim the space, to walk through the rooms and remind myself that it was, in fact, mine. The moment I stepped over the threshold, however, the grim reality of what had happened hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air was thick with the cloying scent of Sarah's expensive perfume, mingled with the stale smells of spilled champagne and warm bodies. It was the ghost of a party I had never been invited to, in a home I had not yet inhabited. The living room was a disaster. The custom-made sofa had a prominent, dark red wine stain on one of the cushions. The beautiful oak floors were scuffed and sticky in places. They had left behind a trail of debris, paper plates with half-eaten cake, crumpled napkins, empty beer bottles, a single child's shoe lying abandoned in the middle of the room. In the dining room, the congratulatory cake for Jason and Sarah still sat on the table, a grotesque monument to their audacity. A large, angry-looking slice had been hacked out of it. I walked through the house like a ghost, my footsteps unnervingly loud in the silence. Every room felt tainted, violated. This wasn't the triumphant first walkthrough I had dreamed of for years. It wasn't a blank slate filled with hope and possibility. It was a crime scene. I wasn't a new homeowner full of joy. I was a victim surveying the damage. I found the master bedroom, my bedroom, and saw that they had thrown their coats and purses onto the bare mattress. The indentation of Sarah's handbag was still visible on the plastic covering. The intimacy of that violation, the casual assumption that even my most private space was theirs for the taking, made me feel sick to my stomach. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. I locked the front door, the click of the deadbolt echoing in the empty house, and drove back to my apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and stared into the darkness, the events of the evening replaying in my mind on an endless loop. The victory felt hollow, and the silence from my family was a heavy, ominous blanket. The blanket was ripped away at 7 a.m. the next morning. My phone, which had been silent all night, lit up with the first incoming text. It was from my mother. It wasn't a single message. It was a novel, a long, scrolling block of text that was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and guilt. "Emily, I don't even know what to say. I am just sick with disappointment. I lay awake all night thinking about what you've done. Do you have any idea of the damage, the humiliation you have caused? Your brother's children were terrified by the police. Lily cried herself to sleep asking why Aunt Emily hated them. Jason's reputation with his friends, with our family, is in tatters. And for what? For a house? For some wooden drywall? I did not raise you to be so cruel, so selfish, so materialistic. You have put a crack in this family so deep I don't think it will ever be repaired. Your father is so disgusted he can't even bring himself to say your name. I hope you're happy, all alone in that big, empty house. You have made your choice. You chose a building over your own blood. I read the message 3 times, each word a carefully crafted dagger. She had twisted the entire narrative. I was the cruel one. I was the selfish one. The blame for the children's tears was laid squarely at my feet, not at the feet of the parents who had them trespassing in the first place. There was not one word of acknowledgement for what they had done. No apology. No remorse. Only condemnation for my reaction to their crime. Before I could even process my mother's diatribe, another message came through. It was from Sarah. Hers was short, brutal, and to the point. You're a pathetic, jealous monster. I hope you rot in that house alone. Don't you ever dare to speak to me or my children again. You'll regret this. Then came a text from an unknown number. This is your Aunt Carol. I just heard from your mother what happened. I am shocked and appalled at your behavior. After everything this family has done for you, to steal from your own brother and then humiliate him with the police is unforgivable. Do not call me again. The smear campaign had begun. The speed and efficiency with which they had spread their version of events was breathtaking. In their story, I was the villain. Jason was the victim, and they were all lining up to pledge their allegiance to his cause. I realized with a sickening certainty that they had probably been laying the groundwork for this lie for weeks. They had likely been telling people that Jason was buying a house, that I was helping him out with the finances. My secrecy, which I had thought was my protection, had become their greatest weapon. It had created a vacuum of information that they were now happily filling with their own toxic fiction. My phone buzzed again. It was my cousin, Mark. I had always been close to Mark. I thought naively that he might be calling to get my side of the story. I answered, a flicker of hope in my chest. "Emily? What the hell did you do?" he asked, his voice cold, accusatory. There were no pleasantries. "Mark, it's not what they're saying," I started, my voice desperate. "They broke into my house. I bought it. It's mine. Jason said you were supposed to be co-signers, that you put the house in your name for a better interest rate and then locked him out," he shot back. "He said you used his down payment money and are refusing to give it back. Is that true?" I felt the air leave my lungs. The lie was so specific, so detailed, so completely fabricated. It was designed to be believable. "No, Mark, that's insane. I have the bank records. I have every pay stub. I saved for 10 years for this. He never gave me a single dollar." "Wow," he said, and the disbelief in his voice was palpable. "So you're really sticking to this story? You've really changed, Em. I never thought you were like this." He hung up before I could say another word. That was when the grief hit me. It was a physical, overwhelming wave. I had not only lost a dream of a peaceful new life, I had lost my entire family. My mother, my father, my brother, my aunt, my cousin. They had all, without a moment's hesitation, chosen to believe a lie over the truth, because the lie was more convenient. The lie maintained the family hierarchy, the one where Jason was the deserving prince and I was the dutiful, invisible servant. My act of defiance, of daring to claim something for myself, had shattered that hierarchy, and for that, they would never forgive me. I sat on my floor, surrounded by the boxes of a life that no longer felt like it was moving forward, and I cried. I cried for the house. I cried for the stolen moment. But mostly, I cried for the family I thought I had, and for the devastating, undeniable truth that they had never really existed at all. The isolation was absolute. They had successfully painted me as the villain, and in doing so had left me completely and utterly alone. For 2 days, I existed in a fog of grief and isolation. I didn't answer my phone, which continued to buzz with texts from unknown numbers, messages from distant relatives who had been drawn into the drama, all of them variations on the same theme. "I'm so disappointed in you." I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just moved from my bed to my sofa and back again, the weight of my family's collective condemnation pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The doubt, that insidious weed they had planted in my mind my whole life, began to sprout. Was I too harsh? Did I overreact? Maybe I should have just talked to them. Maybe I could have worked something out. The turning point came on the 3rd day. A certified letter arrived. A crisp, official-looking envelope that felt cold to the touch. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was a cease and desist letter and a demand for payment. It was from a lawyer representing my brother, Jason Parker. The letter was a work of pure fiction. It claimed that I had entered into a verbal agreement with my brother to act as a financial vessel for his purchase of the property. It stated that he had provided me with $50,000 in cash for the down payment, a sum he had received from a private business transaction. It accused me of unlawfully occupying the property and converting his personal funds for my own use. It demanded that I immediately vacate the premises and repay him the $50,000, plus damages for emotional distress, within 30 days, or he would be forced to pursue further legal action. Reading the letter was like being electrocuted. The sheer audacity, the calculated legalistic cruelty of it, shocked me out of my grief-stricken stupor. $50,000? A verbal agreement? This wasn't just a family smear campaign anymore. This was a deliberate, premeditated attempt at extortion. Jason wasn't just trying to win the argument. He was trying to ruin me, to bury me in legal fees and baseless accusations until I broke and gave him what he wanted. He wasn't just trying to steal my house. He was trying to steal my entire future. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief and the doubt were burned away by a white-hot, clarifying rage. The time for passive defense was over. The time for hoping they would see reason was a foolish dream. This was a war, and they had just launched a major offensive. It was time for me to launch a counterattack. My first call was not to my family, but to a lawyer. I found a highly rated real estate and civil litigation attorney in the phone book. Her name was Margaret Walsh. When I got her on the phone, I didn't cry or get hysterical. I calmly and methodically laid out the facts, from the secret purchase of the house to the party to the police call and, finally, to the demand letter I was holding in my hand. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Then," Ms. Walsh said, her voice a mixture of professional calm and sheer disbelief, "Ms. Parker, in my 20 years of practicing law, this is one of the most brazen attempts at property fraud I have ever encountered. What your brother and your family have done is not just unethical, it is illegal, and we are going to shut it down." Hearing that validation from a calm, authoritative stranger was like a dam breaking inside me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I was the victim of a crime. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice filled with a newfound strength. "We gather our evidence," she said. "Every last piece. We don't just build a defense. We build a fortress so impenetrable that they will have no choice but to retreat. And then, we go on the offense." For the next 48 hours, I worked with a singular, obsessive focus. I transformed my small apartment into a war room. I started with the financials. I logged into my online banking portal and downloaded 10 years' worth of statements. I went through them, line by line with a highlighter, marking every paycheck deposit from the hospital. I created a spreadsheet, a meticulous accounting of my life, income, rent, utilities, groceries, and the steady, relentless transfers to my high-yield savings account, the Dream House account. The numbers told a clear, irrefutable story. Every single penny that had gone toward the down payment and closing costs had come from my salary, and my salary alone. There was no mysterious $50,000 cash deposit. There was no financial help from anyone. There was only my hard, lonely work. I printed out every statement, every spreadsheet, creating a binder nearly 3 inches thick. This was Exhibit A, the money. Next, I moved on to the security footage. This was the hardest part. I had to force myself to download the complete video file from that night and watch the entire 3-hour party from start to finish. It was emotional torture. I had to listen to their laughter, to their casual insults, to the lies they told each other. But I wasn't watching as a wounded victim anymore. I was watching as a prosecutor. I took notes, time-stamping every crucial moment. At 15 p.m., Jason's toast about his new home. 7:42 p.m. Sarah's lie about the custom-made imported sofa. 8:02 p.m. My father's speech about Jason being the man of the family. 8:30 p.m. My Aunt Carol calling me a simple girl who didn't need a big house. I saved the video file to a hard drive. This was Exhibit B, the conspiracy. At my lawyer's suggestion, I also began to write. I wrote down every memory I had of my family's financial and emotional manipulation. The $2,500 borrowed for Jason's leadership camp. The time my father convinced me not to ask for a raise because it would be unladylike. The time my mother told me I should give Jason my old car instead of trading it in because he needs it more than you need the money. A pattern of abuse, both subtle and overt, emerged, stretching back decades. It was a painful, cathartic process, a lancing of 1,000 old wounds. Armed with my fortress of evidence, I met with Ms. Walsh again. She looked through everything I had gathered, her expression growing more and more grim. "This is airtight," she said finally. "His lawyer is either incompetent or a con artist himself for even taking this case." Now, we strike back. That afternoon, we went to the county courthouse. It was a sterile, impersonal building, a place of cold facts and hard consequences. We filed 2 things. The first was a formal response to Jason's lawyer, categorically denying all his claims and including a motion to dismiss his suit as frivolous. The second, and more important, was a petition for a restraining order against Jason, Sarah, and both of my parents, citing their illegal entry, their ongoing harassment, and their slanderous accusations. The clerk stamped the papers with a loud, satisfying thud. It felt like a gavel falling on my old life. The papers were sent out to be served that same day. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but I couldn't resist. I picked up and said nothing. "A man just came to the house," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panicked fury. "He served your father and me with a restraining order." "A restraining order? From our own daughter? Have you completely lost your mind, Emily? What are you doing?" I let her scream for a moment longer, then I said, my voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake, "I'm protecting my property, and I'm protecting myself. A lawyer will be in touch." I hung up the phone. The power dynamic had shifted. The fear was no longer mine, it was theirs. And it was a strange, terrifying, and profoundly liberating feeling. The counterattack had begun. The day of the restraining order hearing was gray and overcast, the sky a flat, oppressive sheet of white that perfectly matched the sterile, institutional pallor of the courthouse. I sat beside my lawyer, Margaret Walsh, at a long, polished table. I was wearing a simple navy blue dress, the most professional-looking thing I owned. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, but inside my stomach was a churning knot of anxiety and dread. This was it. This was the moment where my family's private dysfunction would be laid bare under the cold, impartial light of the law. They were already there, sitting at the opposite table. Jason, Sarah, my mother, and my father. They were a united front of indignation. Jason was wearing a suit that was slightly too tight, a desperate attempt to project the image of a successful businessman wronged. Sarah sat ramrod straight, her lips a thin, hard line, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, refusing to even look in my direction. And my mother, true to form, was dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch for an audience of one, the judge. Our case was called. We all stood as the judge. A stern-looking woman with sharp eyes and her hair pulled back in a severe bun entered the room and took her seat. The air was thick with tension. The judge looked over the file in front of her. This is the matter of the petition for a restraining order by Emily Parker against Jason Parker, Sarah Parker, Robert Parker, and Linda Parker. Mr. Parker, she said, looking at Jason's lawyer, I have read your client's creative response to this petition and his associated claim. Would your client care to explain to me, under oath, his version of the events that led us here today? Jason took the stand. As he walked past me, he shot me a look of pure venom. He settled into the witness chair, adjusted his tie, and turned on the charm. He smiled at the judge, a practiced, easy smile that had worked on our parents his entire life. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and reasonable. This is all just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding that has been blown completely out of proportion by my sister, Emily. She's a wonderful girl, but she's always been a bit overwhelmed by big decisions. When this house came on the market, a place our family has admired for years, I saw an opportunity. I had come into some money from a private investment, and I wanted to provide a stable home for my wife and children, but my credit wasn't perfect. Emily, being the sweet sister she is, offered to help. We had a verbal agreement. I would give her the $50,000 for the down payment, and she would put the mortgage in her name to secure a better rate. The house was always meant to be for my family. I was shocked, truly shocked, when she changed her mind at the last minute and called the police on us during our housewarming party. He delivered the speech flawlessly. He sounded convincing. He sounded like the victim. I could see my mother nodding along, tears now genuinely welling in her eyes. I felt a flicker of the old doubt. He was so good at this, so practiced at twisting reality to suit his needs. Ms. Walsh stood up. Mr. Parker, she began, her voice devoid of emotion. You state you gave your sister $50,000 in cash? That's correct, Jason said confidently. And where did this cash come from? As I said, a private business transaction, he replied evasively. I see. A transaction for which you have no receipt, no bank withdrawal slip, no record whatsoever. Jason's smile tightened. It was a cash deal. These things happen in business. Ms. Walsh nodded slowly. Indeed. Your Honor, I would like to present Exhibit A. She placed the 3-inch binder of my financial records on the clerk's desk. These are Ms. Parker's complete bank statements for the past 10 years. They show a decade of methodical saving from her salary as a registered nurse. They show the direct transfer of funds from her savings account to escrow for the down payment. What they do not show is a cash deposit of $50,000 or anything close to it. They tell a very clear story, Your Honor. The story of a woman who earned and saved every single penny that bought this house. The judge peered down at the binder through her reading glasses, flipping through a few pages. Jason's confident posture began to wilt. Now, Mr. Parker, Ms. Walsh continued, you claim the house was always meant for you. You had a party to celebrate this, correct? A housewarming party? We were celebrating a new chapter for our family, Jason said defensively. A new chapter that began in a house you didn't own. It wasn't a question. Your Honor, I would like to present Exhibit B. An assistant wheeled in a television and a DVD player. A knot of pure dread and vindication tightened in my stomach. Ms. Walsh inserted the disc. This is security footage from the evening in question, taken from Ms. Parker's own security system. She hit play. The courtroom was silent as my living room appeared on the screen. The image was crystal clear. We all watched as Sarah bragged about the custom-made imported sofa. We watched as my father toasted Jason for being the man of the family. And then came the main event. The camera was perfectly positioned, the audio crisp and clear, as Jason raised his glass of champagne, his face beaming with arrogant pride. "Here's to new beginnings." His voice boomed through the quiet courtroom. "To family, to fresh starts. It's been a long road, but we finally have a place to call our own. A real home for my family." The video played on, but the judge held up her hand. "That's enough," she said. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the most damning, most profound silence I had ever experienced. In that silence, every lie Jason had told, every justification my parents had made, every accusation they had hurled at me, evaporated. There was only the truth, naked and ugly, for everyone to see. I chanced to look at my family. Jason was staring at his hands, his face pale and clammy. Sarah's face was a mask of fury and utter humiliation. My father looked like he had been physically struck, his mouth slightly agape, and my mother was no longer pretending to cry. She was staring at the blank television screen, her face a mixture of shock and, for the first time, something that looked like shame. The judge took off her glasses and looked directly at Jason. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of cold, hard steel. "Mr. Parker, I have seen and heard enough. The story you have told this court is a complete and utter fabrication. The evidence presented by Ms. Parker is irrefutable. This is her property. Your presence there, along with that of your family, was illegal." She then turned her gaze on Jason's lawyer. "And counsel, I would strongly advise you to reconsider the merits of the frivolous and potentially fraudulent claim you have filed on your client's behalf." The lawyer shrank in his seat. The judge's gavel struck the wood, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "The petition for a restraining order is granted, effective immediately, for a period of 1 year. The four of you will not come within 500 feet of Ms. Parker or her property. You will not contact her by any means. Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. We are done here." She stood and swept out of the courtroom. It was over. My family sat frozen for a moment, as if they couldn't process what had just happened. Then slowly, they gathered their things and stood to leave. They didn't speak. They didn't look at me. Their arrogance, their indignation, their self-righteous anger, it was all gone, replaced by the quiet, bitter shame of being publicly exposed. As they walked past, my mother finally met my gaze. Her eyes were filled with a confusing mixture of anger and a deep, wounded sorrow. But there was no apology in them. There was only the knowledge that something had been broken forever. I had not shouted. I had not cried. I had not sought revenge. I had simply presented the truth. And the truth, in the quiet, sterile light of that courtroom, had been my silent, devastating, and total victory. After the hearing, Ms. Walsh and I walked out of the courthouse and into the now bright afternoon sun. The oppressive gray clouds had broken, and the city seemed sharper, more vibrant. "Congratulations, Emily," she said, giving my shoulder a firm, reassuring squeeze. "You did the right thing. It was hard, but you did it." "Thank you, Margaret," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was a profound, bone-deep relief, the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted after carrying it for so long you had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't want to see the boxes, the remnants of my old life. Instead, I drove to the lake. I drove to my house. I parked in the driveway, my driveway, and walked up the path to the front door. I pulled out my key, the original, the one I had held in my hand with so much hope what felt like a lifetime ago. The locksmith had come the day after the incident, changing every lock and giving me a new, untainted set of keys. I slid this new key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and with a soft click, the door opened. This time, when I stepped inside, the house was silent. The stale smell of the party was gone. I had hired a professional cleaning crew, and they had scrubbed the house from top to bottom. The wine stain on the sofa was gone. The floors gleamed. The grotesque cake had been thrown away. All the physical evidence of the violation had been erased. The house was a blank slate again, and this time, I was the one who would make the first mark. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing softly on the clean wood floors. I ran my hand along the cool, smooth surface of the kitchen countertop. I stood in the master bedroom and looked out the window at the sunlight sparkling on the lake. There was no fanfare, no applause, no family there to congratulate me. There was just peace. A quiet, solitary, and hard-won peace. I had imagined this moment for so long, but it was different than I had pictured. It wasn't a moment of explosive happiness. It was a moment of deep, profound calm. I didn't feel the need to celebrate. I just felt the need to be To exist in this space that I had fought for, that I had bled for, that I had won. I thought about my family. I pictured their faces in the courtroom, stripped of all their usual bluster and arrogance. I felt a pang of sadness, not for them, but for the loss of the idea of them. The idea of a family that supports you, that celebrates your victories, that loves you unconditionally. I knew now that I had never really had that. I had been mourning a fantasy. Letting go of that fantasy was painful, but it was also liberating. I realized the fight hadn't really been about the house. The house was just the battlefield. The fight had been for my own truth. The fight was to prove, if only to myself, that my work mattered. My sacrifices were real, and my dreams were valid. The restraining order wasn't a wall to keep them out. It was a boundary to keep me safe. It was a declaration that I would no longer allow their toxicity, their entitlement, their lies, to have a place in my life. I walked to the large picture window in the living room, the one I had dreamed of for so long, and looked out at my view. The lake was calm, the trees on the far shore a deep, lush green. It was beautiful. It was mine. My revenge was not in their public humiliation. My revenge was not in their defeat. My quiet revenge was in this moment. It was in the peace I felt standing in my own living room, in my own silent house, knowing that I had held on to my integrity, that I had stood up for myself, and that I had finally, truly, come home. The house would never be stolen from me again, physically or emotionally. Sometimes family betrayal hurts worse than the actions of strangers. It cuts deeper because it comes from the very people who are supposed to be your safe harbor. But your peace, your hard work, your truth, it's worth protecting. Don't let anyone steal your moment. And if you've ever fought for something that was rightfully yours, if you've ever had to draw a line in the sand with the people you love, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it.